Celtic Myths and Legends by T.W. Rolleston. Chapter 3, Irish Invasion Myths. The Children of Lir. Lir was the Danann entity, the father of the sea entity, Manan, who continually occurs in magical tales of the Milesian cycle. He had married in succession 2 sisters, the second of whom was named Oif, pronounced Aoife. Okay, yeah, I never would have thought that. Gaelic can kind of have a... Is it Gaelic the Irish and Gaelic the Scottish? She was childless, but the former wife of Lir had left him 4 children, a girl named Fionn Uala, the name means the maid of the fair shoulder, and 3 boys. The intense love of Lir for their children made the stepmother jealous, and she ultimately resolved on their destruction. It will be observed, by the way, that the people of Dana, though conceived as unaffected by time and naturally immortal, are nevertheless subject to violent death either at the hands of each other or even of mortals. With her guilty object in view, Aoife goes on a journey to a neighboring Danann king, Bove the Red, taking the 4 children with her. Arriving at a lonely place at Lake Derry Varog in Westmeath, she orders her attendants to slay the children. Now, when the spirits are killed, sometimes some spirits will do that as a show, and for one purpose or another. They refuse and rebuke her. Then she resolves to do it herself. But, says the legend, her womanhood overcame her, and instead of killing the children, she transforms them by spells of sorcery into 4 white swans, and lays on them the following doom. 300 years later, they are to spend on the waters of Lake Derry Varog, 300 on the Straits of Moyle between Ireland and Scotland, and 300 on the Atlantic by Eris and Inishglori. After that, when the woman of the south is mated with the man of the north, the enchantment is to have an end. When the children fail to arrive with Aoife, at the palace of Bove, her guilt is discovered, and Bove changes her into a demon of the air. She flies forth, shrieking, and is heard of no more in the tale. Now, when we think of the Queen of Air, we can perhaps put Aoife there. She flies forth, shrieking, and is heard of no more in the tale. But Lir and Bove seek out the swan children and find that they have not only human speech, but have preserved the characteristic Danann gift of making wonderful music. From all parts of the island, companies of the Danann folk resort to Lake Derry Varog to hear this wondrous music and to converse with the swans. During the time, a great peace and gentleness seemed to pervade the land. Now, when I've heard spiritual music, per se, generally it comes through as something entirely vocal. Now, some of these things can be difficult to say, but, and I know I've struggled trying to present them at times, but some of these things repeated have their effect, or have their meaning. And from all parts of the island, companies, the non-folk resort to Lake Derry Varog to hear this wondrous music and converse with the swans. During the time, a great peace and gentleness seemed to pervade the land. But at last, the day came for them to leave the fellowship of their kind and take up their life by the wild cliffs and ever-angry sea of the northern coast. Here they know the worst of loneliness, cold, and storm, Forbidden to land, their feathers froze to the rocks in the wintry nights, and they were often buffeted and driven apart by storms, as Fionn Nuala sings. And the Danann folk listen to the music of the swans. The music of nature is quite the thing. And I try to step outside mere entertainment into the effectual. And it's like bees. A certain note will cause bees to attack if you know, there's some interesting things you can play with. But cruel to us was Eofi, who played her magic upon us and drove us out on the water, 4 wonderful snow-white swans. Our bath is the frothing brine, and bay by rocks guarded. For mead at our father's table, we drink of the salt blue sea, 3 sons and a single daughter, in clefts of cold rocks dwelling, the hard rocks, cruel to mortals. We are full of keening tonight. And Ethne hears voices. And there is the region of the brain from which memories of the dead and various other things may come, but there's also the spiritual encounters, and sometimes they are only in terms of voices. And it's interesting that certain times and places will shut that off for certain people. I had hoped to interview a particular person that would say that, for example, during the 9th month of the Islamic calendar, that he would not have certain experiences, nothing visual, nothing audio. But once Ramadan came to an end, Fionn Nuala, the eldest of the 4, takes the lead in all their doings, and mothers the younger children most tenderly, wrapping their plumage round them on nights of frost. At last the time comes to enter on the 3rd and last period of their doom, and they take flight for the western shores of Mayo. Here, too, they suffer much hardship, but the Milesians have now come into the land, and a young farmer named Everic, dwelling on the shores of Eris Bay, finds out who and what the swans are and befriends them. To him they tell their story, and through him it is supposed to have been preserved and handed down. When the final period of their suffering is close at hand, they resolve to fly towards the palace of their father Lear, who dwells, as we are told, at the hill of the White Field in Armagh, to see how things have fared with him. And they do so, but not knowing what has happened on the coming of the Milesians, they are shocked and bewildered to find nothing but green mounds and ween bushes and nettles, where once stood, and still stands, only that they cannot see it, the palace of their father. And I had an experience once that that a spirit said that it was going to, say stuff again or say some calls and stuff like this. I think I've shared that experience on the channel. Maybe I didn't, but it's not that I can't say that it never showed up again. I can just say maybe I was just never aware of it again. Their eyes are holden, we are to understand, because a higher destiny was in store for them than to return to the land of youth. On Eris Bay, they hear for the first time the sound of a Christian bell. It comes from the chapel of a hermit who has established himself there. Yeah, Vivaltia could, that entity, Vivaltia, he, she, it, whatever. Perhaps, it's an entity of a place, and therefore by not returning to the place at a particular time, which it did not tell me, enemies. On Eris Bay, they heard for the first time the sound of a Christian bell. It comes from the chapel of a hermit who has established himself there. A lot of spirits like the playing of musical instruments. The swans are at first startled and terrified by the thin, dreadful sound, but afterwards approach and make themselves known to the hermit, who instructs them in the faith, and they join him in singing the offices of the church. Now it happens that a prince of Munster, Deaka, the woman of the south, becomes betrothed to a Connacht chief named Lergnen, and begged him as a wedded gift to procure for her the 4 wonderful singing swans whose fame had come to her. She asks them of the hermit, who refuses to give them up, whereupon the man of the north seizes them violently by the silver chains with which the hermit had coupled them, and drags them off to Deaka. This is their last trial. Arrived in her presence, the awful transformation befalls them. The swan plumage falls off and reveals not indeed the radiant forms of the non-entities, but 4 withered, snow-haired, and miserable human beings, shrunken in the decrepitude of their vast old age. Lergnen flies from the palace in horror. But the hermit prepares to administer baptism at once, as